The rusted lock gave way with a sound like breaking teeth, and Yates Marlowe froze in the darkness of the slavers' camp, listening for any sign that the guards had heard. When only the crackling of distant campfires and the soft breathing of the captive women reached his ears, he moved to the second cage, his hands already working at the next lock with the stolen tools he had lifted from the overseer's tent an hour before. He had not planned this rescue when he rode into the border settlement of Thornfield 3 days ago. Yates had come seeking work, nothing more, his veteran's pension from the Northern Wars barely enough to keep him fed as he drifted from town to town. But then he had seen the cages in the Merchant Square, 4 orc women locked behind iron bars like animals, and something in him had simply broken. He had fought alongside orcs in the campaigns against the Eastern necromancers. He had seen their courage, their loyalty, their capacity for both fierce strength and surprising gentleness. The sight of them caged and bound for the southern auction blocks had churned his stomach until he could not sleep, could not eat, could not think of anything except the hollow resignation in their eyes. So here he was at midnight, committing what would certainly be labeled as theft of valuable property if he was caught, prying open the locks one by one while the slavers snored in their tents and the moon hid behind clouds as if conspiring with him. The second lock opened. The third. The fourth. 4 cage doors now stood ajar, and Yates stepped back, waiting for the women inside to realize they were free. His heart hammered against his ribs as seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, movement stirred in the first cage. A figure emerged slowly, cautiously, as if expecting a trap. She was tall, probably matching his own height of just over 6 feet, with the characteristic green skin that marked her as one of the southern clans. Her tusks, small and curved, caught what little moonlight filtered through the trees. Her hair, dark and braided in an intricate pattern, fell past her shoulders. She wore the tattered remains of what had once been sturdy traveling clothes, now reduced to little more than rags by weeks of captivity. Her eyes, amber in the darkness, fixed on Yates with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse, but the single word carried a weight of confusion and suspicion that Yates understood completely. Why would a human free them? What trick was this? What new cruelty awaited? "Because it is wrong," Yates said simply, keeping his voice low. "Because you are people, not property. I have horses waiting beyond the tree line to the east, food and water. Enough coin to get you to the free territories if you ride hard and do not stop." The other 3 women had emerged from their cages now, clustering behind the first. They were all young, Yates realized, probably in their early 20s at most. One had a poorly healed wound across her shoulder. Another was too thin, her cheeks hollow with starvation. The third kept one arm wrapped protectively around her ribs as if they pained her. The first woman, who seemed to be their leader, studied Yates as if he were a puzzle she could not quite solve. "You are risking your life for strangers," she said, and it was not a question but an observation tinged with disbelief. "I have risked my life for worse reasons," Yates replied. "Now go, please. The guards change watch in less than an hour. You need to be miles from here before they discover the empty cages." The woman did not move. Neither did her companions. They simply stood there, 4 figures in the darkness, watching him with identical expressions of wary confusion. Yates felt frustration beginning to build in his chest. He had expected them to run the moment the locks were open. He had not anticipated this frozen hesitation, this paralyzing uncertainty. "Listen to me," he said, stepping closer and immediately regretting it as all 4 women tensed like cornered animals. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I understand you have no reason to trust me. I understand that humans have given you every reason to expect cruelty and tricks. But I am telling you the truth. There are horses and supplies waiting. If you leave now, you have a chance at freedom. If you stay here until dawn, you will be back in those cages and I will probably be hanging from a tree. So please, for the love of all that is sacred, go." The leader exchanged glances with her companions. Something passed between them, some silent communication that Yates could not interpret. Then she turned back to him and said something that made his carefully laid plans crumble to dust. "We have nowhere to go." 4 words. 4 simple words that changed everything. Yates stared at her, his mind racing through the implications. Of course they had nowhere to go. The Orc territories were hundreds of miles to the north, across lands patrolled by hostile militias and bounty hunters. The free settlements to the west were marginally better but still dangerous for lone Orc women without coin or connections. And clearly, these 4 had been separated from whatever clan or family they had once belonged to. Otherwise, there would have been someone to ransom them back. "The horses," Yates began, but the woman cut him off. "The horses will carry us perhaps 3 days before we are recaptured or killed. We have no weapons, no knowledge of this land, and no one who will shelter us. Freedom is a beautiful dream, human, but it means nothing without a destination." Yates opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. He had thought only of getting them out of the cages, not of what came after. It had seemed sufficient in his planning to simply give them the means to flee. But the means were useless without a safe haven to flee toward. Distantly, a dog barked in the slavers' camp. Voices rose briefly, then fell silent again. They were running out of time. "I have a homestead," Yates heard himself say, the words emerging before he had fully thought them through. 2 days' ride south near the edge of the frontier territories. It is not much. Just a farmhouse and some land I inherited from an uncle I barely knew. But it is isolated and it is defensible, and no one there will ask questions about who you are or where you came from. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Why would you offer this?" "Because I cannot think of what else to do," Yates admitted. "And because leaving you here to be recaptured is not an option I can live with. Come with me now, stay until you are rested and healed, and then you can decide where you want to go. At least you will have time to plan properly, instead of running blind into hostile territory." Another of those silent exchanges between the women. The injured one nodded slightly. The thin one's shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. The one holding her ribs simply closed her eyes as if in prayer. The leader looked back at Yates with an expression he could not quite read. "If this is a trap," she said quietly, "if you are leading us into something worse than these cages, I want you to know that I will kill you. I may die immediately after, but I will take you with me." "Understood," Yates said, and found that he believed her completely. "Then we accept your offer." They moved through the forest like ghosts, Yates leading and the 4 women following in near-perfect silence. The horses were where he had left them, 6 of them hobbled in a small clearing. He had bought 4 for the women and brought his own mount plus a pack horse for supplies. The women approached the animals cautiously at first, but it quickly became apparent that they knew their way around horses. Within minutes, they were mounted and ready, though the injured one had to be helped into her saddle by her companions. They rode south through what remained of the night, keeping to game trails and avoiding the main roads. Yates set a steady pace, fast enough to put distance between them and the slaver camp, but not so fast as to exhaust the horses. As the eastern sky began to pale with the approach of dawn, he called a halt near a stream where the horses could drink, and the women could rest for a few minutes. The leader dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle. Up close, in the growing light, Yates could see details he had missed in the darkness. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. Scars marked her arms and shoulders, the kind earned in battle rather than through abuse. Her hands were calloused but strong. When she knelt by the stream to drink, he noticed a tattoo on the back of her neck, intricate knotwork that spoke of clan affiliations he did not recognize. "I am Yates Marlowe," he said, realizing they had not even exchanged names yet. "I served in the northern campaigns for 6 years before mustering out 8 months ago." The woman straightened, water dripping from her chin. "I am Sera Coldbrook. This is my sister Sera." She gestured to the injured woman, who offered a wan smile. "And these are our friends, Senna and Silva. We were of the Iron Peak clan before the raids came." Yates knew about the raids. Everyone who paid attention to news from the frontier knew about the raids. Human militias, emboldened by rhetoric from nationalist politicians in the capital, had been attacking orc settlements for the past 2 years. The attacks were illegal, technically, but the authorities turned a blind eye more often than not. Entire clans had been scattered or destroyed. Those who survived often had nowhere to go except deeper into the wilderness or into the clutches of slavers who saw profit in the chaos. "I am sorry," Yates said, and meant it. Sera studied him for a long moment. "You fought alongside orcs in the war." It was not a question. Yates nodded anyway. "2nd Battalion, Mixed Company. We held the eastern passes for 2 years. My sergeant was an orc named Draka. He saved my life 4 times that I can count, probably more that I never knew about. He died covering our retreat from the necromancer's siege engines at Blackridge. I think about him every day." Something in Sera's expression softened just slightly. "Then perhaps you understand that trust is not easily given by my people to yours." "I understand," Yates said. "I am not asking for trust, just for a chance to prove I mean you no harm." Sera turned away to help her sister back onto her horse. But as they prepared to ride again, she said quietly, "You have already proven more than most humans would, Yates Marlowe. We will see where this road leads." They reached the farmstead as the sun climbed toward noon, and Yates felt a familiar mix of relief and embarrassment as his property came into view. Relief because they had made it without pursuit. Embarrassment because the place was even more run down than he remembered. The farmhouse was sturdy enough, built of thick timber and stone, but the paint was peeling and several of the shutters hung crooked on their hinges. The barn needed repairs. The fences needed mending. The fields, which should have been planted weeks ago, stood empty and overgrown with weeds. He had inherited this place 3 months ago, and had visited it exactly once before today, just long enough to confirm that the structure was sound and the well still functioned. He had planned to return and make it livable, to perhaps start the farming life that so many veterans turned to after their service ended. But the sight of those cages in Thornfield had derailed those plans rather dramatically. Sera dismounted and walked in a slow circle, taking in the property with a tactical eye. "Defensible," she said finally. "Good sight lines. Water source." "Well in the yard, stream about 100 yards north," Yates replied. "The house has 4 rooms. You can take the bedrooms." "I will sleep in the barn until I can build additional space." "We can sleep in the barn," Sera countered. "This is your home." "It is a house," Yates corrected. "It will be a home when there is life in it. Right now it is just walls and a roof. Please take the bedrooms." "You need rest more than I do." Sera had already dismounted and was leaning heavily against her horse, her face pale with exhaustion. Senna, the thin one, looked like she might collapse at any moment. Silva was still holding her ribs, her jaw clenched against obvious pain. Sera looked at her companions and then back at Yates. "For tonight, she conceded. Tomorrow we discuss more permanent arrangements. They got the women settled in the house while Yates saw to the horses. By the time he came back inside, Sera had fallen asleep in one of the bedrooms despite the lack of proper bedding. Sera was curled up in another room, already unconscious. Silva sat stiffly in a chair near the cold fireplace, clearly in too much pain to lie down comfortably. Sera stood by the kitchen window, watching the road as if expecting pursuit to appear at any moment. "You should rest," Yates said. "Someone should keep watch." "I will keep watch. You have been in a cage for how long?" "6 weeks, Sera said, not turning from the window. "Before that, 2 weeks on the run after the militia burned our village. Before that, a lifetime of relative peace that I apparently took for granted." Yates busied himself building a fire in the hearth. The kitchen still had basic supplies from his previous visit: flour, dried beans, salt pork. Not much, but enough to make a meal. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Sera watching him, her eyes tracking his every movement as if he might suddenly transform into a threat. "Tell me about your uncle," she said suddenly. "The one who left you this place." Yates shrugged. "Not much to tell. My father's brother. He came west 40 years ago and carved this farm out of wilderness. Never married, never had children. When he died, I was his only living relative, so the property came to me. I met him exactly twice in my life. And you do not want to be a farmer." "I do not know what I want to be," Yates admitted. "I was a soldier. That is all I have been since I was 18 years old. Now the war is over and I am supposed to figure out what comes next, but I have no idea where to even start." Sera turned from the window finally, her expression thoughtful. "You were 18 when you enlisted. 17, technically. Lied about my age. My father had just died and my mother could not afford to keep feeding another mouth. The army seemed like the answer to every problem." "And was it?" Yates laughed bitterly. "It solved the problem of hunger and homelessness, created plenty of others in their place." He paused in his work, staring down at his scarred hands. "I do not regret my service. I did good, I think, more often than not. But I came home to find that the world had moved on without me and I no longer fit anywhere." "You fit here," Sera said quietly. "In this moment, you fit exactly where you are supposed to be." Yates looked up at her, surprised by the intensity in her voice. But before he could respond, Silva gasped in pain from her chair, doubling over and clutching her side. Both Yates and Sera moved to her at the same time. "Let me see," Sera said, gently pulling Silva's arm away from her ribs. She lifted the torn fabric of the woman's shirt, revealing a mass of purple and black bruising that made Yates wince. "When did this happen?" "5 days ago," Silva gritted out. "One of the guards kicked me when I would not cooperate with his entertainment." Sera's expression went flat and cold. "Which guard? Does it matter? They are miles away and we are here. It matters to me." "Let it go, Sera. We are free. That is enough." Sera did not look convinced, but she turned her attention back to examining the injury. After a moment, she looked up at Yates. "Do you have medical supplies?" "Bandages. Something for the pain." "Some," Yates said. "From my army pack. Not much, but better than nothing." He retrieved his old field kit from the barn, the battered leather bag that had followed him through 6 years of campaigns. Inside were rolls of clean linen bandages, a few packets of powdered willow bark for pain, needles and thread for stitching wounds, and various other items that had saved lives on the battlefield. Sera took the bag with a nod of thanks and set to work wrapping Silva's ribs with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "You have medical training," Yates observed. "Every member of an orc war band learns basic battlefield medicine," Sera replied without looking up. "We cannot always rely on having a healer present." Your clan was a war band. We were farmers. But when the raiders came, we became whatever we needed to be to survive. She finished wrapping the bandages and helped Silva stand. You need to lie flat. Come on. Once Silva was settled in the third bedroom, Sera returned to the kitchen where Yates had resumed preparing food. She watched him work for a long moment before speaking. You are afraid of us. Yates paused in his stirring. No, you are nervous then. That is different from fear. Is it? Yates set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her. I am nervous because I have no idea what I am doing. I freed you from those cages on impulse without thinking through the consequences. Now you are here in my house, dependent on me for safety and shelter, and I have no plan beyond getting through today. Tomorrow is a mystery. Next week is incomprehensible. So yes, I am nervous, but I am not afraid of you. I am afraid of failing you. Sera was quiet for a long time. Then she crossed the kitchen and took the spoon from his hand, gently pushing him aside to take over the cooking. You have been taking care of everyone else since we escaped. Sit down. Let someone take care of you for a moment. Yates wanted to protest, but the truth was that he was exhausted. He had not slept in 36 hours. His body ached from riding and his mind felt like it was wrapped in wool. He sank into a chair at the rough-hewn table and watched as Sera worked over the fire, her movements economical and sure. You are a good cook, he said after a while. My mother insisted all her children learn. She said cooking was the foundation of civilization. She sounds wise. She was. She died in the raids. I am sorry. Sera shrugged, but Yates could see the grief in the set of her shoulders. War leaves no one untouched, you know this. He did. He knew it in his bones, in the nightmares that still woke him in the dark hours before dawn, in the way he flinched at loud noises and could not stand to have his back to a door. The war had ended, but its scars remained. They ate in companionable silence when the food was ready, simple stew that tasted better than it had any right to. After, Sera insisted that Yates go to the barn and rest while she kept watch. He was too tired to argue. He found a pile of relatively clean hay in one of the stalls, wrapped himself in a blanket, and fell into sleep so quickly that he did not even remember closing his eyes. When he woke, the light filtering through the barn's cracks suggested it was late afternoon. He had slept for hours, longer than he had intended. Yates stumbled outside to find Sera still awake, still watching, now from a seat on the porch. She looked as exhausted as he had felt, her eyes red-rimmed and her shoulders sagging. You were supposed to rest, he said. Someone had to keep watch. No one is coming. The slavers do not even know where I live. It will take them days to track us here if they bother trying at all. You cannot know that. And you cannot stay awake forever. Yates climbed the porch steps and sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You have to trust me sometime. It might as well be now. Sera turned to look at him, and in the golden light of the setting sun he saw past her defenses for just a moment. Saw the bone-deep weariness, the grief, the fear that she held so carefully in check. Saw how much it cost her to remain strong for her friends, to be the leader they needed even when she wanted nothing more than to fall apart. I do not know how to trust anymore, she admitted quietly. I do not know how to do anything except survive. Then we will figure it out together, Yates said. Surviving is a good start. We can build from there. Sera held his gaze for a long moment, then finally nodded and let her head drop back against the wall of the house. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of true exhaustion. Yates sat beside her as the sun set and the stars emerged, keeping the watch she had been unable to surrender. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt almost normal, though Yates knew it was only the calm before whatever storm was coming. He spent his mornings working on repairs to the farm while the women rested and healed. Sera's shoulder improved steadily under Sera's care. Senna began to regain weight as regular meals restored her strength. Silva's ribs stopped hurting enough that she could move without wincing, and Sera, slowly, began to relax. Not completely, she still checked the road a dozen times a day and slept with a knife under her pillow, but enough that she sometimes smiled. Enough that she started helping with the work around the farm, bringing the knowledge and skills of a lifetime spent in an agricultural community. She showed Yates how to properly prepare the fields for late planting, how to repair the fences so they would actually hold livestock, how to organize the barn for maximum efficiency. "You really have no idea what you are doing, do you?" she said one afternoon as they worked on reinforcing the barn's foundation. "Not even a little bit," Yates admitted cheerfully. "My expertise begins and ends with knowing which end of a sword is sharp." Sera laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Well, you are a quick learner at least. This farm might actually produce something before winter comes." "We should plant," Yates said. "It is late in the season, but there is still time for some crops. Potatoes, maybe, root vegetables. We will need food if," he stopped, suddenly uncertain. "If we are still here," Sera finished. She set down the hammer she was holding and turned to face him fully. "We should talk about that." Yates had been dreading this conversation even as he knew it was inevitable. "All right. My friends and I have been discussing our options. The truth is, we have very few. We cannot return to Iron Peak territory. There is no Iron Peak territory anymore. The free settlements to the west are too dangerous to reach without an escort we cannot afford. The northern clans might take us in, but that is a journey of months through hostile lands, and we have no guarantee of welcome even if we survive the trip." "So you want to stay here," Yates said, trying to keep his voice neutral even as his heart beat faster. "We want to ask if we can stay here," Sera corrected. "We will work. We will help build this farm into something profitable. We will defend it against anyone who comes looking for trouble. But we will not stay as charity cases or prisoners. If we stay, it must be as equals. As partners in this endeavor." Yates looked at her, at this strong, proud woman who had been through hell and somehow emerged unbroken, and felt something shift in his chest. "I would be honored," he said simply. "This place is too big for one person anyway. It was meant to be a home for a family." "Maybe we can make it that." Sera's eyes widened slightly. "Family. Not in the I did not mean," Yates stumbled over his words, his face flushing. "I just meant a community, people living and working together. I was not suggesting anything inappropriate." A smile played at the corners of Sera's mouth. "I know what you meant, Yates Marlowe, and yes, we will stay. We will make this place a home." They shook hands on it, and Yates tried to ignore the way his skin tingled where her palm pressed against his. Word spread quickly in the frontier territories. Within 2 weeks, people in the nearest settlement knew that Yates Marlowe's farm was harboring orc women. The reactions were mixed. Some neighbors, veterans like himself who had fought alongside orcs in the war, stopped by with donations of supplies and offers of support. They did not make a big show of it, just left things on the porch at night, or happened to mention that they had extra seed that needed using before it went bad. But others were less kind. Yates started finding crude warnings nailed to his fence posts. Someone shot arrows into his barn in the middle of the night, messages of hate wrapped around the shafts. A delegation of townsfolk came to his door demanding that he turn over the orc women for proper relocation. A euphemism so transparent it made his blood boil. He sent them away with words that were barely civil, and afterward found Sera standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. You are making enemies for us, she said. I am making enemies for myself, Yates corrected. You just happen to live here. That is a distinction without a difference. Maybe, but it is my choice to make. Sera shook her head. You do not understand the price you are paying. In a human community, protecting orcs makes you an outcast, makes you a target. You could lose everything. I have already lost everything that mattered, Yates said. My family is gone. My army is disbanded. I have no friends except the ones I am making here. So what exactly do I have to lose by doing what I know is right? Your life, you stubborn fool. We all die eventually. Might as well die standing for something worthwhile. Sera stared at him for a long moment, and Yates could not quite decipher the expression on her face. Then she closed the distance between them in 3 quick strides and pulled him into an embrace that drove the breath from his lungs. He stood frozen for a heartbeat, startled, before his arms came up to return the gesture. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder, for everything, for freeing us, for giving us a home, for defending us when you had no reason to. I had every reason to, Yates said. You are good people. That is reason enough. When Sera pulled back, there were tears tracking down her green cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, almost angrily, and turned to leave. But at the door, she paused and looked back. My mother used to say that the measure of a person is not what they do when it is easy or profitable, but what they do when it costs them everything and gains them nothing. You are a good man, Yates Marlowe, better than you know. Summer deepened into a season of hard work and harder choices. The farm slowly came to life under their combined efforts. The fields were planted, late but hopeful. The barn was repaired and reinforced, fences mended. The house gradually transformed from a neglected structure into something that felt lived in and warm, with curtains in the windows and herbs growing in boxes by the kitchen. The 4 women proved to be tireless workers, attacking each task with the kind of focus that came from having purpose after long captivity. Sera, fully healed now, turned out to have a gift for animal husbandry and convinced Yates to invest in a small flock of chickens and a pair of goats. Sera discovered a talent for carpentry and started building furniture to fill the house's empty rooms. Silver revealed that she was an accomplished herbalist and planted a garden full of medicinal plants that might provide income when the harvest came. And Sera was everywhere, her mind constantly working on how to improve the farm, how to make it more efficient and more defensible. She designed a better layout for the crops, organized a system for water management, and even drew up plans for a small smokehouse that would let them preserve meat through the winter. Working beside her day after day, Yates found himself falling into a routine that felt more right than anything in his life ever had. They would rise at dawn and work through the morning, breaking for a midday meal that they all took together at the big kitchen table. Afternoons were for the heavier labor, clearing stumps, hauling stones, digging irrigation channels. Evenings they spent on lighter tasks, mending tools or preparing meals or simply sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the hills. It was during one of these evening sessions that Sera, emboldened perhaps by the warm weather and the sense of safety that had begun to settle over the farm, asked the question that had been hovering unspoken for weeks. Are you two courting? Yates, who had been whittling a piece of wood into something that might eventually resemble a spoon, nearly stabbed himself with the knife. Beside him on the porch, Sera went very still. What? Yates managed. You and Sera, clarified, as if it were not already painfully obvious. Are you courting? Because it certainly looks like you are. We are not, that is, we have not. Yates floundered, his face burning. We are friends, Sera said firmly. Partners in this farm, nothing more. Sera exchanged glances with Senna and Silva, who had joined them on the porch to enjoy the evening air. All three of them wore expressions of supreme skepticism. "Right," Sera said slowly. "Friends, who just happen to spend every waking moment together, who finish each other's sentences, who light up like the sun whenever the other walks into a room." "That is not we do not," Sera stammered, and Yates felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and hope at seeing her so flustered. "It is all right if you are," Sera said gently. "We would not judge. You both deserve happiness." "There is nothing to judge because nothing is happening," Sera insisted. She stood abruptly. "I am going to check the perimeter." She fled the porch before anyone could respond, disappearing into the growing darkness. An awkward silence fell. Yates focused very intently on his whittling, acutely aware of three sets of eyes studying him with open curiosity. "For what it is worth," Silva said eventually, "I think you would be good for each other. You both carry the same wounds, the same losses. Perhaps together you could find a way to heal." "It is not that simple," Yates said quietly. Even if we there are rules, social expectations. An orc and a human together, it would cause even more trouble than we already have." "So you do have feelings for her," Sera said triumphantly. Yates set down his knife and wood, defeated. "It does not matter what I feel. It matters what is practical, what is safe. And pursuing anything with Sera would be neither of those things." "Life is more than practicality and safety," Sera said. "Sometimes you have to take risks for the things that matter. I have already taken risks. Look where we are. Look at the threats we face every day." "And would you undo any of it?" Silva asked. "Would you go back and leave us in those cages if you could?" "Of course not." "Then why is this any different? Why is risking your heart somehow more dangerous than risking your life?" Yates had no answer for that. He sat in silence as the stars emerged overhead, thinking about a green-skinned woman with amber eyes and a smile that made him forget every rule he had ever learned about what was possible and what was not. He found Sera down by the stream, sitting on a flat rock and staring into the water. She did not look up as he approached, but she did not tell him to leave either, which Yates took as permission to sit beside her. "I am sorry about that," he said after a while. "They meant well. I know. That makes it worse somehow." Sera picked up a pebble and tossed it into the stream, watching the ripples spread. "They want me to be happy. They think you could make me happy. And the truly terrible part is that they are probably right." Yates's breath caught. "Sera, do not." She held up a hand. "Please. Let me say this before I lose my courage." She took a deep breath. "I have been trying not to feel anything for you, trying to see you only as a benefactor, a partner, a means to survival. But somewhere between the cages and this farm, between your constant kindness and your absolute refusal to give up on us even when you should, I fell in love with you. And it terrifies me." The world seemed to stop. Yates could hear his heart beat loud in his ears, could feel the warmth of Sera's arm inches from his own, could see the vulnerability written across her face as she finally looked at him. "It terrifies you," he repeated stupidly. "Of course it does. You are human. I am orc. Such relationships are forbidden by both our peoples. Pursuing this could destroy everything we have built here, could put you in even more danger than you are already in." Yates kissed her. It was an impulse, unplanned and probably unwise, but suddenly nothing else mattered except closing the distance between them. Sera made a surprised sound against his mouth, then melted into the kiss with an intensity that made his head spin. Her hands came up to cup his face, her tusks pressing gently against his cheeks, and Yates thought that he had never felt anything so perfectly right in his entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sera rested her forehead against his. "That was extremely foolish," she whispered. "I know. We will face opposition from everyone, humans and orcs alike. I know. It will make our lives so much more difficult, I know. And you want to do it anyway. Yates pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Sera Coldbrook, I have wanted to do this since the moment you emerged from that cage and looked at me like I was a puzzle worth solving. I do not care what rules we are breaking or what opposition we face. I love you. And if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that this choice, this impossible, foolish choice, is the best decision either of us ever made. Tears spilled down Sera's cheeks again, but this time she was smiling. You ridiculous, wonderful man. Yes, yes, I will have you. They kissed again, longer and deeper, and Yates felt something he had not felt since before the war began. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of survival, but the bright, burning hope of a future worth building. When they finally returned to the farmhouse, hand in hand, they found Sera, Senna, and Silva waiting on the porch with knowing smiles. So, Sera said. Friends are you? Shut up, Sera replied, but she was grinning. The next weeks were among the happiest of Yates's life, despite the challenges that continued to mount. The crops grew strong and green in the fields. The animals thrived under Sera's care. The farm slowly transformed from a derelict property into something that might actually turn a profit by harvest time. And through it all, Yates and Sera navigated their new relationship with a mixture of joy and caution. They were not secretive about it. Hiding seemed pointless in a household of 4 where everyone knew everyone else's business, but they were careful. Careful not to make the others uncomfortable. Careful to maintain the balance of the community they had built. Careful to remember that they were still in danger, still vulnerable, still living on the edge of a society that would condemn them for daring to love across the divide of species. The hostility from the nearest town continued to escalate. More threatening letters. More midnight visits from unknown parties. Yates started sleeping with his old army sword close at hand, and taught all 4 women how to use the small collection of weapons he had accumulated. They established watch rotations and practiced defensive positions in case someone ever decided to make good on the threats. It was exhausting, living under constant threat. But it also brought them closer together, forging the 5 of them into something that felt less like a household and more like a unit. A family, Yates thought sometimes, in the way that soldiers became family through shared hardship and mutual reliance. Then came the night the militia arrived. Yates was on watch when he spotted the torches in the distance, a line of flickering lights approaching along the road. He counted at least 20 men, maybe more, and his blood ran cold. This was not a delegation coming to talk. This was a mob coming to purge. He rang the bell he had installed by the porch, the signal they had established for emergencies. Within seconds, lights appeared in the house as the women woke and mobilized. By the time the first of the militia reached the fence line, all 5 of them were arrayed on the porch, armed and ready. Yates Marlowe, a voice called from the darkness. You are harboring stolen property. Release the orc females immediately or face consequences under frontier law. These women are not property, Yates shouted back. They are free people under my protection. Leave now and there will be no trouble. You have no authority to declare orcs free. They are chattel, legally designated as such by the territorial governor. Hand them over. Yates felt Sera tense beside him, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. They could fight, but 20 armed men against 5 defenders was poor odds no matter how well trained. They could flee, but where? The militia had horses and knew the territory. Running would just delay the inevitable. No, Yates said, and was pleased that his voice did not shake. You want them? You will have to go through me. So be it, the voice said, and the militia advanced, What followed was chaos. The militia reached the fence and began to climb over, and Yates met them with his sword while the women used bows to pick off the attackers from the porch. He fought like he had been taught in the army, economically and efficiently, dropping men with quick strikes to disable rather than kill. Beside him, Sera fought with a style that was all fluid grace and devastating power, her captured weapon dancing in her hands. But there were too many. For every man they put down, two more seemed to take his place. Yates felt a blade scrape across his ribs, another catch his shoulder. Blood ran hot down his side. His arms burned with exhaustion. They were losing, slowly but inevitably, driven back toward the house by sheer weight of numbers. Then, impossibly, the tide turned. New fighters poured onto the scene, men Yates recognized from the settlement. Veterans like himself, men who had fought alongside orcs in the war and had not forgotten what they owed. They crashed into the militia's flank with a fury that stopped the assault cold. "We stand with Marlowe," someone shouted. "These women are under our protection." The battle became a melee, neighbor against neighbor in the flickering light of fallen torches. Yates fought on, exhaustion forgotten in the desperate need to defend his home and the people he loved. He lost track of time, lost track of everything except the next threat, the next attacker. When the militia finally broke and fled, leaving their wounded behind, Yates found himself on his knees in the yard, gasping for breath and bleeding from half a dozen wounds. Sera was beside him instantly, her hands on his face, her voice urgent. "How bad?" "Yates, look at me. How bad are you hurt?" "Not bad," he managed. "Just tired. So tired." "You are an idiot," she said fiercely. "You could have been killed. You should have let us run." "And go where?" Yates asked. "This is our home, Sera. Our home. Worth fighting for. Worth bleeding for." Sera pulled him against her chest, holding him tight as if she could shield him from all the dangers of the world through sheer force of will. Around them, the veterans who had come to their defense were helping the wounded and securing the prisoners. One of them, a grizzled man named Thomas who Yates vaguely recognized from town, approached with a canteen of water. "You all right, Marlowe?" Thomas asked. "I will live. Thank you." "All of you. I do not know why you came, but I am grateful." "We came because it was right," Thomas said simply. "We fought beside orcs in the war, bled with them, died with them. We do not forget our debts, and we do not abandon our own. You are one of us, and these women are under our protection now too." "The town will not like this," Yates warned. "The town can go hang. There is a new governor being appointed next month, one who actually fought in the war. Word is he is going to overturn the chattel laws, declare orcs to be citizens with full rights. Until then, we make our own law out here on the frontier, and our law says these women stay free." Yates felt something in his chest unclench, a tension he had been carrying for so long that he had forgotten it was there. "Thank you," he said again, inadequate words for an impossible gift. Thomas just grinned. "Thank us by healing up and getting back to work. That farm of yours has potential. Be ashamed to see it go to waste because you bled out in your yard." The aftermath of the battle was a strange mix of celebration and sober reality. The wounded were tended. The captured militia members were sent back to town with messages that anyone who attempted violence against the farm again would face the combined wrath of the veteran community. Thomas and the others helped repair the damage to the fence and barn before heading home, promising to return if there was more trouble. Inside the house, as Sera stitched the wound on Yates's ribs with steady hands, the four women talked in low voices about what had happened. About the fact that humans had fought other humans to defend them. About the possibility that the world might actually be changing, might be becoming a place where orcs and humans could coexist without constant violence. Do not get too hopeful, Sera warned, though Yates could hear the hope in her own voice. One battle does not win a war. One group of decent men does not change centuries of prejudice. But it is a start, Sera said. It is more than we had yesterday. She is right, Yates said, wincing as Sera tied off the last stitch. Things are changing. Slowly, painfully, but they are changing. We just have to hold on long enough to see it through. Sera cupped his face in her hands, her amber eyes searching his. We can do that, together. Together, Yates agreed. The harvest came in better than anyone had expected, the late planting yielding enough potatoes, turnips, and other root vegetables to fill the cellar and provide surplus to sell. Silva's herb garden produced medicines that fetched good prices in town, especially from Thomas and the other veterans who spread word of her skill. Sera's chickens provided a steady supply of eggs, and the goats gave milk that Sera learned to turn into cheese. The farm was not wealthy by any measure, but it was stable. It was thriving. It was a home in truth now, not just in word. As autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Yates found himself standing in the newly cleared north field, looking at plans Sera had drawn up for expanding their operations. More land under cultivation, a proper barn for horses. Maybe even a small herd of cattle if they could afford it. You are thinking too small, Sera said, coming up beside him. She had her own set of papers, covered in her precise handwriting. We should be thinking about the next 5 years, not just next season. 5 years, Yates repeated. You plan to stay that long? Sera gave him a look that was half amused, half exasperated. Yates Marlowe, I plan to stay the rest of my life. Where else would I go? This is home. You are home. Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. Then I suppose we should make proper plans. He hesitated, then pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a ring, carved from a piece of oak and polished smooth over many evenings of secret work. And while we are making plans, perhaps we should make the most important one official. Sera stared at the ring, her eyes going wide. Yates. I know it is not much, Yates said quickly. I know a human and an orc marrying is still technically illegal under territorial law, even if that is changing. I know we would have to travel to the free settlements to find someone willing to perform the ceremony. But Sera, I love you. I want to build this life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to grow old watching this farm flourish and knowing we built it together. So, Sera Coldbrook, will you marry me? Sera's hands shook as she took the ring, turning it over to examine the intricate carvings Yates had worked into the wood. Leaves and vines, symbols of growth and life, intertwined in patterns that represented 2 lives becoming one. You carved this yourself, she said. I did. Spent every evening for the past month working on it while you thought I was just whittling. It is beautiful. Sera looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. You are beautiful. Your heart, your courage, your absolute refusal to accept the limitations the world tries to place on us. Yes, Yates Marlowe. Yes, I will marry you. I will stand beside you for however many years we are given, and I will count myself the luckiest orc in all the territories. Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, holding each other in the middle of the field they had planted together, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built from ashes and hope. When they returned to the house to share the news, they found Sera, Sera, and Silva waiting with knowing grins and a bottle of wine that Thomas had gifted them after the battle. About time, Sera said. We were starting to think you would never get around to it. You all knew he was planning this, Sera asked. He asked our permission, Sera said. Since we are the closest thing you have to family now, we gave him our blessing weeks ago. Though we did threaten to gut him if he hurt you, Silva added cheerfully. Sera laughed, bright and free, and pulled all three women into an embrace. "You are more than the closest thing to family. You are my sisters in every way that matters." They drank the wine and celebrated late into the night, making plans for the wedding and for the future. Sera wanted to expand the livestock operation, maybe get some sheep. Senna dreamed of building a workshop where she could craft furniture to sell. Silva wanted to establish a proper healing practice, offering medical care to those who could not afford the expensive doctors in the cities. And through it all, Yates and Sera sat side by side, their hands clasped together, the wooden ring on Sera's finger catching the firelight. "We should do it soon," Sera said. "The wedding, before winter makes travel impossible." "Next month," Yates suggested. "That gives us time to make arrangements to travel to the free settlements." "Next month," Sera agreed. "And then we come home and face whatever the future brings together." They were married on a crisp October morning in a small chapel in the free settlement of Haven's Rest, 3 days' travel from the farm. Thomas and a dozen other veterans made the journey to stand as witnesses, along with Sera, Senna, and Silva, who served as Sera's family. The ceremony was simple, conducted by an old chaplain who had served in the army and had no patience for laws that forbade love. "I have married too many soldiers on the eve of battle," the chaplain said as he bound their hands with a cord of braided leather. "Have watched too many die without ever knowing the peace of love fulfilled. If you too have found that peace, found that love, then no law of men or gods will stop me from blessing it." When Yates and Sera exchanged vows, promising to stand together through all hardships and all joys, there was not a dry eye in the chapel. Even Thomas, tough as old leather, had to wipe moisture from his cheeks. The return journey to the farm took 4 days instead of 3, slowed by a combination of poor weather and the simple fact that Yates and Sera kept stopping to steal moments of privacy along the trail. They traveled as a group, a small caravan of veterans and orc women and 2 newlyweds who could not seem to stop smiling. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the farm, Yates felt his heart swell with an emotion he could not quite name. Pride, perhaps. Satisfaction. But more than that, belonging. This patchwork family, this unlikely collection of broken people who had found each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of their old lives, this was where he belonged. "Home," Sera said softly beside him, echoing his thoughts. "We are home." Winter came, as it always did, with cold winds and snow that blanketed the farm in white. But inside the house, there was warmth. There was laughter. There was family. Yates and Sera shared the master bedroom now, waking each morning tangled together beneath quilts that Senna had made. Sera tended the animals with cheerful efficiency, even in the worst weather. Silva worked in her herb room, preparing medicines and teaching Senna the basics of healing. They weathered the season together, 5 people who had become something more than the sum of their parts. News filtered in from the outside world as travelers occasionally stopped at the farm. The new governor had indeed overturned the chattel laws. Orcs were now legally recognized as citizens with full rights under territorial law. Mixed marriages, while still uncommon and still facing social stigma, were no longer forbidden. "The world is changing," Yates said one evening as they all sat around the fire, the wind howling outside. "Maybe not as fast as we would like, but it is changing." "Because of people like you," Sera said. "People willing to stand up and say that the old ways are wrong, that there is a better path forward. Not just me, all of us. Thomas and the veterans, the chaplain at Haven's Rest. Every person who chooses compassion over prejudice, love over hate. We are all part of it. Then here is to being part of something larger," Sera said, raising her cup in a toast. Here is to change and to the family we have made. To family, they all echoed and drank. Spring returned, as it always did, with green shoots pushing up through the thawing ground and birdsong filling the air. The farm exploded with activity as they prepared for a full growing season, this time with proper planning and resources. Thomas and some of the other veterans helped them acquire more livestock, including a small herd of cattle that Sera managed with the same skill she brought to everything else. One warm afternoon in late spring, as Yates and Sera worked side by side in the fields, she suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to her stomach. "What is wrong?" Yates asked immediately, dropping his tools. "Are you hurt?" "No," Sera said, and there was wonder in her voice. "No, I am not hurt." "Yates, I think I am with child." The world stopped. Yates stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "You are, we need to be certain, but yes, I think we are going to have a baby." Sera's hand trembled where it rested on her still flat belly. "I know it is unexpected. I know it makes everything more complicated. A half-orc child, even in these changing times, will face challenges that neither of us can fully understand. But Yates, I want this. I want our child. I want our family to grow." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in all the world, because she was. "Of course we are going to have this baby. Of course. And yes, there will be challenges. But when have we ever backed down from a challenge?" "Never," Sera said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We never have." They told the others that evening, and the celebration that followed was even more joyous than the wedding had been. Sera immediately began making plans for converting one of the spare rooms into a nursery. Senna started crafting a cradle from fine wood. Silva dove into her medical texts, researching everything she could find about orc pregnancies and what special care Sera might need. And Yates, practical Yates, who had spent years planning military campaigns and farm operations, found himself planning for something entirely new: fatherhood. He built toys in the evenings, carved from scrap wood. He reinforced the floors in the nursery to ensure they would be safe. He made lists of supplies they would need, things they would have to learn, ways to prepare for the momentous change coming to their lives. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer, Sera remaining active and strong even as her belly swelled. The farm thrived under their combined care, producing yields that exceeded even their optimistic projections. They were going to have enough to sell significant surplus at market, enough to finally turn a real profit. In late autumn, as the leaves turned colors and the air grew crisp, Sera went into labor. Silva attended her with calm competence, guiding her through each stage with the confidence of someone who had studied extensively. Yates stayed by Sera's side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the steady presence she needed. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes, Yates felt something in him fundamentally shift. This tiny person, this perfect combination of orc and human, was the future they had been fighting for. Proof that love could bridge any divide, that families could be built across any boundary. "She is beautiful," Sera whispered, exhausted but glowing. "What should we name her?" Yates looked down at his daughter, at the miracle they had created together, and remembered a promise he had made to himself years ago. "Sera," he said, "for my mother, and Draka for the orc who taught me what true brotherhood meant. Sera Draka Marlowe." "Sera Draka Marlowe," Sera repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect." The winter that followed was the happiest of Yates's life. The house was full of the sounds of a baby crying, yes, but also cooing and gurgling and all the small noises that signaled new life. Sera, Senna, and Silva all doted on little Sera, fighting over who got to hold her, teaching her orc songs, introducing her to the animals on the farm as if she could understand. News of the baby spread through the region quickly. Some people reacted with hostility, calling Sera a mongrel and worse things that Yates refused to dignify by repeating. But more people, especially the veterans who had come to see the farm as a symbol of the new world they were trying to build, reacted with joy. They brought gifts, offered congratulations, welcomed Sera as proof that orcs and humans could build futures together. Thomas came to visit on a bright winter day, bringing a hand-carved rocking horse that must have taken him weeks to create. He held Sera with the awkward gentleness of a man unused to infants, and when she grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, his eyes went suspiciously bright. "She's going to change the world, this little one," Thomas said. "She and all the children like her. They will grow up in a world where the old prejudices do not make sense anymore, where love between different peoples is just love, nothing more complicated than that." "I hope you are right," Yates said. "I am right. I have seen it before in other places, other times. Change happens slowly, then all at once. Your family, this farm, you are the slowly part. Your daughter will live in the all at once." Spring came again, marking a full year since Yates and Sera had married. The farm prepared for another growing season, this time with Sera watching from a sling on Sera's back, as her mother's she called both Sera and Yates's, 3 companions' mother without distinction, worked the fields. She would grow up knowing 5 parents who loved her, Yates thought. She would never lack for care or protection or guidance. One evening, as the sun set over the hills and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Yates stood on the porch with Sera beside him and Sera sleeping against his chest. The farm stretched out before them, green and growing, full of life and promise. In the barn, Sera was singing to the animals in her native orc tongue. In the house, Senna and Silva were preparing dinner, their laughter floating through the open windows. "Do you ever think about that midnight when you pried open those cages?" Sera asked softly. "Every day," Yates admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I would be caught, how I had no plan beyond getting you free. And now I cannot imagine my life without you. Without any of you. That night, I thought I was rescuing 4 women. I did not realize I was rescuing myself." Sera leaned her head against his shoulder. "We all rescued each other. That is how families work, I think. We save each other over and over in 1,000 small ways and a few large ones." "Then here is to a lifetime of rescuing each other," Yates said. "To family," Sera agreed. They stood together as the stars emerged overhead, husband and wife, parents and partners. 2 people from different worlds who had built a bridge between them from love and stubbornness, and an unshakable belief that the future could be better than the past. Behind them, the door opened and Sera called them in for dinner. Sera stirred and made a small noise of contentment without waking, and Yates felt, perhaps for the first time in his life, completely and perfectly at peace. The farm would continue to grow, the seasons would turn, challenges would come and be overcome. But whatever happened, they would face it together, 5 adults, 1 child, and whatever additions time would bring to their makeshift family. They had started with nothing but hope and determination. They had built a home, and they would defend it together for as long as they drew breath.